It's been 20 years since Jaromir Jagr was traded from the Pittsburgh Penguins. It's also been 21 years since I was born. And to put that, the reason I'm bringing that up is because I'm a diehard Pittsburgh Penguins fan. You guys know that. But I have never once seen Jaromir Jagr play an NHL hockey game for the Pittsburgh Penguins. I've seen him play for other teams, but not for the Penguins. He was traded in 2001. I was 1 year old. And even if I did see him on TV, I do not remember it. But since we are nearing the 20th anniversary of this trade, let's do a trade tree. And this one I was excited to do. And then I realized it's really not that complicated. The Penguins were in a stage in their history where they were going through a rebuild, and a massive rebuild. They sold off everyone, and Jagr was the biggest piece. The Penguins couldn't afford to keep him, literally afford. They could not pay him, which I understand it from both sides. Obviously, the Penguins, edging towards bankruptcy, and Jagr is a superstar. He deserves the money. In his time with Pittsburgh, in his 11 years with Pittsburgh, obviously he's a two-time Stanley Cup champion. In his first 2 years in the league, which is amazing, he never won a Stanley Cup outside of the first 2 years in his league, and he's one of the most tenured players of all time. I think it's, how many years did he play? Like 24? So 22. Older than I am, years without winning. It was crazy. He also won the Art Ross 4 times, the Hart Trophy as well, countless other awards, but really just the 2 cups, the Art Rosses and the Hart is really what you look towards in terms of big awards. And Jagr was a superstar, and he still is just a superstar human being. But in terms of his playing style in the late 90s and early 2000s, he was a superstar. And the Penguins couldn't afford to keep him, so they traded him to the Washington Capitals, which if this trade were to happen today, it would, it never would. It's the equivalent of like trading Malkin to like the Capitals if the Penguins were to, hypothetically go through a rebuild. But thankfully, this was before the days of Ovechkin and Crosby, of course, so there wasn't that big of a rivalry, but there still was a rivalry there. The trade was Jaromir Jagr and Frantisek Kucera, who I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but no offense to him, he is not the biggest name on this trade. And no offense to anyone else, Jagr is the only name that I knew in this trade, going over it. And the Penguins got back 3 prospects as well as a bunch of cash, $4.9 million to be exact, and we'll go over that first. The reason this trade was made was because of cash and because the Penguins couldn't afford to keep him. Craig Patrick got money out of this, almost $5 million, which again, keep in mind this was 20 years ago, which is a lot more, back then than it is today. Saved the Penguins. Potentially saved the Penguins, because they couldn't afford to keep him. It was a money move. And the 3 picks, or the 3 prospects that the Washington Capitals traded Pittsburgh were all from the 1999 draft, and they were all within the top 35 players drafted that year. They include Michael Svek, Ross Lupashuk, and Chris Beach. None of them were anything in the league. And really, that's the gist of this trade tree. The Jordan Staal trade tree was amazing. You got a bunch of big names in here. Oh, Derek Brassard's a part of that. Blah, blah, blah. Jared McCann's a part of that. This one, it really ended as soon as it started because Michael Svek and Ross Lupashuk bounced around in the AHL and in the NHL. Svek played 38 games in Pittsburgh, and he had 6 points. And then he went overseas after he was sent down to the AHL. Lupashuk played 3 games for the Penguins, had all zeros across the boards, 4 penalty minutes. Same thing, AHL and then overseas. We can nix these branches, 3 of these branches already. Chris Beach did play 3 years in Pittsburgh. He had a career high of 25 points, which compared to Jaromir Jagr, that's not the same. But again, this was a money move. But you would still like a little bit out of it in terms of the prospects. These prospects didn't become anything. Chris Beach was actually traded to Nashville for a 4th round pick in the 2006 draft. That became Derek Lapointe, but the Penguins did not draft him. They actually traded that pick to Florida for Florida's 2007 4th round pick. Who did that 4th round pick become? Well, it's a name you guys probably know, and Rust. They got Rust out of this. Matt Rust. Not Brian Rust, Matt Rust, who played 0 games, played in the NHL, went to the AHL and was never heard of again. That nixes the end of this branch, and that is it. That completes the Jaromir Jagr trade tree. It was 3 trades. And as I mentioned, none of these guys became anything. Savek, Beach, and Lupashuk combined had 31 points total and 135 games played together with the Penguins. Washington, of course, got Jagr, who scored 201 points with them, and Kucera, who scored 14 points with them, for a total of 215 points in 246 games played. Jagr spent 3 seasons in Washington before he was traded to the New York Rangers for Anson Carter, 1-for-1. Amazing. Not an equal trade at all. But again, Jagr went on to play for a bunch of other teams, and he was traded 4 times in his career. To Washington, to the Rangers, to Boston, and to Dallas, possibly. I don't remember it specifically. Was he traded to Florida? I don't know. But Jagr's a guy that he moved around so much that you can't really look back on the trades and be like, oh, the Penguins got fleeced in it. Even though the Penguins, they did get fleeced in this one. As I mentioned, none of these guys were anything. But it cannot be overlooked why this trade was made. Jaromir Jagr, the Penguins were not going to contend for the 2002 Stanley Cup. Jagr and the Penguins, after that conference final in 2001 against the Devils, that looked like it was it. And, they almost went bankrupt, and they did go bankrupt. They lost a lot of money, and Jagr was costing the team a lot. He was moved out promptly. Now, it's interesting to also look at what the teams themselves did, because it's easy to look at Washington and be like, oh, they won the trade. But Washington made the playoffs once in the 3 years that Jagr was there, and they were out in the first round in 2002, 2003. The Penguins, of course, missed the playoffs ever since 2001 to 2007, where they made the playoffs in 2007, and guess what? They're still making the playoffs. They've never missed a playoff since. But anyways, I want to do more trade trees. I thought Jagr would be the next, big trade tree that I could potentially do, but looking at it, as I mentioned before, there's not much here. Comment down below what you would possibly think is a big trade tree that I could dive into, like the Jordan Staal one. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for 330 subscribers. I really do appreciate it. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you all in the next video.